Have you ever witnessed something so amazing that you couldn't help but get tingly all over, knowing something bigger than you had to have had a hand in it, like a firm voice guiding you from out of nowhere, maybe telling you to buckle up, move, not to move, get out of the way, something that just stopped you in your tracks, and you knew that you needed to do it right then. In an earlier episode, I told a story similar to this, but in that case, the person saw an accident about to happen involving him and a vehicle that had not been visible to him yet, that he could not have yet known was going to do what they did because of having seen what was about to happen in his mind as he was driving. He was able to correct course and get out of the way of the vehicle, watching in shock as it aggressively moved exactly from where he had just been. Over the course of my career, in getting to have great conversations with people every day, I have had the pleasure of hearing some pretty incredible stories that I was raised to believe would have had to have been the work of guardian angels or of God. Interestingly, there have been patterns that I have observed, as well as a lot of similarities that I knew the people I have spoken with could not have known happened to the other people who shared their stories with me. So combining this information with what I had experienced and learned so far in my spiritual journey, this had become one of the biggest examples of stumbling across a bunch of big giant puzzle pieces I had never known were missing. Welcome back to another episode of Going 5D with Destiny Dawn. I'm your host, Destiny Dawn. Today, we will be discussing who I believe are the unsung heroes of our everyday lives, our spirit guides, and what many refer to as guardian angels. As discussed previously, this fits in perfectly with what I had been experiencing from my perspective, having worked in the paranormal field as well, which had occurred to me at the same time as my realization about the existence of ghosts, spirits, elementals, demons, aliens, and other mythological creatures all coexisting on the same planes as us, but unable to be perceived by most, which I have referred to and talk about in my second episode titled Extra Dimensionals. To hear about all the experiences that led me to the conclusions I have formed, I highly recommend that you check that episode out. But for today's purposes, I will summarize it all by saying that it is my belief we all come from the same place and form a plan before each incarnation. We plan out a series of events, like destination markers on a roadmap, so to speak, which help us assure that we are heading in the right direction, in order to assure that we have specific experiences in order to teach us karmic lessons we came here to learn. Many of these marker points involve other people in order to help one another, either because we will all be in the same specific points in time, for example, or maybe that we have lessons that have the greatest, most effective impact when shared with these specific characters in the story. The reason why could be anything, perhaps because of something particularly unique and special about them or their energetic signature, maybe because they're part of your soul group, or you were just weaved into these points to work through or resolve something specific together because it's about the experience, and maybe that experience doesn't happen all that often. But these are usually the same people that you have in your life for an extended period of time, like coworkers, schoolmates, friends, family. Again, karmic lessons usually associating with past trauma or lessons that we should have learned but didn't for whatever reason, which brings me to an important piece of brings us to an important piece of that roadmap known as exit points, which I wanted to discuss with you. These are carefully placed throughout the lifetime as potential, exit points. Points in time that you planned out, maybe dying. The basic idea with them is that you can exit at any time. If your soul feels that you've gone so far off course, for example, that there has been extremely unlikely or impossible to get back on course, even with the help of your spirit team. Another example might be that you've become so unhappy you no longer want to continue on with the current incarnation for whatever reason. As someone who has had or who has known several people that committed suicide, including my own grandmother, and watched countless people around me slowly killing themselves and having little to no regard for their bodies, I suspect that a great deal of us know at some level that we are unhappy here and make tough decisions about how we will quietly bow out on our own terms. To some degree, it's unconscious, but I believe that to some degree, it's actually conscious too. My whole family fought over whose fault it was when my grandmother died. I knew then that she was the only one to blame because she made her choice for herself. I actually dedicated my book, A World of Parapsychology and the Paranormal, a guide to some of the greatest mysteries in the world, to her by writing, "For my Grandma Ginny, may you now rest in peace after having lived a life where there was none." She had it rough as a kid, then raised 6 children, helped raise 21 grandchildren, spending most of her free time with them. She was a proud, hard-working woman who went through some messed up shit as a kid and came out smiling anyway. She had fallen on hard times at the end and would never have allowed herself to become what she would have considered to be a burden on her family. I know for a fact, I can feel it with every fiber of my being, that she knew she was ready and she left when she planned to. That was the conclusion that I drew back in 2000 when it had happened. Now, after learning what I have, I believe she came here and did what she intended to do. Her job was done. Does that mean she didn't love her family and want to be with them? No, not remotely, not at all. I do not believe that most are consciously aware of these decisions, that they are usually made at a higher level, either by themselves or an executive decision is made by their team. Like those who do all the right things to take care of their bodies and still suffer heart attacks or die from cancer. In those cases, I believe that how long it takes for them to die is heavily dependent on how it will affect the people that they leave behind. For example, if someone has heart disease for a really long period of time, they've probably marked out their exit point and to some degree consciously know that the thing that they are doing, like maybe eating terribly or smoking cigarettes or whatever, is going to inevitably kill them. They're probably scared of it, wishing they could stop, and yet they keep doing it anyway. It's a perfect example. My family, though they did watch her struggle with some depression and anxiety, were not meant to watch something horrific, long, drawn out, a battle with disease or something. In cases where the battles are long or someone continues to neglect their bodies, both of which can take years or even decades, I believe this is often because there were lessons or other things that needed to happen as it related to the people that they left behind. Like a kid that needed to learn a lesson from watching that person go through that, or another family member or a friend. Whatever the case may be, exit points are an important piece of the puzzle because where those exit points are placed along the roadmap can heavily influence how you get there, who you get there with, and if or how you make it past. I once shared a story in a previous episode about a car accident that I was involved in, but I forgot to mention that I was not wearing my seatbelt just prior to the crash. Unlike many other accounts of near-death experiences, I did not get a vision or a big loud giant voice telling me what to do, which is something I have heard many times myself from other people. but I did have the idea conveniently pop into my head just minutes before the accident. You should put on a seatbelt. At the time, I didn't have any reason to think that something was going to happen. I mean, I should have been wearing one in the first place, especially since the driver was intoxicated. But I was like, I think 17 or 18. We were on a straightaway in a flat road in a little town. There wasn't much traffic. It was late at night. It wasn't until preparing for this episode, while listening to someone else tell a very similar story, that I even remembered that happening. That I myself walked around telling everyone how crazy it was after the accident that I had buckled up when I did. How crazy it felt after we rolled and I was suspended upside down by that very seatbelt, looking around at all of the tools scattered about and shocked that none of them had hit me. I believe that was a potential exit point that I had opted not to take, but also served the purpose of, I think, scaring the absolute shit out of the driver. Scaring him into not taking risks like that again. I just have this feeling that there were a few different purposes that served. Like if I had been, going a different route at that point in time and things had been too rough for me, I could totally see myself deciding to just call it quits at that point and start all over. He didn't take it well, to say the least. He lost it. He was crying as we were crawling out, windows trying to get him to do the same, and I remember it took a few minutes to get him out. But he got out fine, and to my knowledge, he never did that again. So, who are these unsung heroes that follow you around everywhere you go, helping you to stay on track while preventing you from things like dying or interfering with someone else's journey? While many would simply call them our guardian angels or guides, I believe it's a combination of extra dimensionals and spirits who have chosen and agreed to accompany us for all parts of our journey, and that we do the same for them. At least for the guides, not so much with the angels. It's kind of a job only they can do. From the spirit side, though, oftentimes people from our soul families who are not needed or doing anything during this incarnation have chosen instead to support one or more members of the group. That's very common for one of your spirit guides to be. Some are from outside of our normal circles whom we've crossed paths with in other lifetimes who want to return a favor or repay a kindness or a debt that they feel like they owe you. Those are usually, in those cases, not there the whole time. Usually they come in at a specific point in time to offer something specifically unique that only they can offer. Finally, people who share one or more karmic goals with you, or points in time and space and place with us on our journeys, making it a mutually beneficial arrangement to cross paths with or provide aid. Now, the extra dimensionals are not in spirit form, although they may be made up of energy and not incarnated, the distinction between them being that they have evolved well past that point. Like your oversoul, for example, or were never part of the human collective at all in the first place. The ones that were never a part of the human collective are the angels or guardian angels I was referring to earlier, and for all intents and purposes are exactly the benevolent and highly evolved beings as described by religious texts. The only difference being the interpretation as it pertains to the nature and origins of these beings, since they are not affiliated with any one doctrine or belief that has been referred to or associated with them. That said, I do still refer to them as guardian angels, as they are called by various religions, because I find it interesting how many references have been made to these messengers and how accurate and consistent those references are, referring to divine beings by many different names, but almost always exactly the same way over thousands of years. I feel like there's something very consistent in the way that the stories about angels have been told, unlike a lot of other things that have been passed down to us. Angels are pretty much the same, with different names and things like that. While most of them have never been human, I believe they are part of whatever plane of existence in which they were created, and generally stay there, in this case, the Earth Collective. Our higher selves, or oversouls, on the other hand, have lived countless lives and usually come from at least visited other places outside of the Earth and human collective. It is said that our planet can accommodate up to 7th dimension and density, as discussed in my previous episode titled Dimensions and Densities. But I believe both of these types of beings live completely outside of that. While aspects of both can and do reside alongside and within the human collective consciousness, they themselves do not. At least that is my understanding. But since I'm currently wearing my spacesuit, I can't exactly speak to the concept much further than that. I will say, though, that our oversouls can and often do have simultaneous incarnations outside of the human and even Earth collective, meaning that they can be living other lives here on Earth at the same time as other points in time and other places not of Earth. The biggest distinction between the two types of beings is that one is trying to have experiences and the other is trying to facilitate in those journeys while protecting and maintaining the energetic balance between human collective and the planet herself. Whoa. That was a lot of information. Let's just take a step back for a second. To recap, you have extra-dimensional beings. Some might even call interdimensional beings if you're referring to just the Earth-based ones, right? But what I'm saying is you have the extra interdimensional beings. Those are your angels and your oversouls. And then you have your spirit guides that have lived in spirit form and come back probably a bunch of times, but chose not to for this lifetime that you are living. Just wanted to clarify that really quick. So, as strange as that may sound, there is actually still a lot more ground to cover. So I wanted to get that out of the way. At this point, you might be wondering why all of this matters. And in the grand scheme of things, for like 80% of people, it might not. I just made up that number, I don't actually know. But I tend to believe that there is no such thing as a coincidence, which is why you are here in the first place, why I am talking about this, and more importantly, why we came here in the first place. So let's take another step back and look at things from a broader perspective. Beyond the fact that I really only have myself to use as an example, at least in the context I'm going to use, I can give other examples of other stories that fit into the puzzle that I put together. I'm going to use my own experiences and the information that I used along the way that brought me to these conclusions. It all started really coming together in 2022. Leading up to that, I was trying to help a former paranormal client who was dealing with an attachment, which I've also spoken about several times at length. The psychic medium that I had been working with up to that time was MIA, and when I did finally track her down, she refused to work with me out of fear of bringing home whatever attachment she thought that I had or that we had picked up somewhere. She decided that at that time she was going to tell me about for whatever reason. Like, she had mentioned something previously, especially one case in particular, but not that it had stuck with her. So I was really confused about why that was such a big thing at that time, but she sounded terrified, so I wasn't going to question it. I was already really confused and just started learning about all of these like super trippy things. And I wanted so badly to help this guy, while at the same time, I'd learned about channeling and I really wanted to do that, but was having a hard time. So I had decided at one point to go and meet with a psychic medium to help me address all of these things that I had going on. Super nice lady. Personally, I did not think that I had any kind of like an attachment and thought that was absurd. Strange things had happened to me and my family during my time working in the paranormal field, but that wasn't anything that was new to me. I hadn't noticed any big change. Like, if something were suddenly started following me around, I felt like I would have noticed. Now, mind you, I had not told her that someone wouldn't work with me anymore because of the attachment, nor had I told her anything about being low vision. And since my very expensive corrective cosmetic surgery, you would really have to look hard to notice any difference in my appearance from someone else's. So I don't think she picked up on that. But I will say, several really odd things started happening right from after I arrived. She did know that there was an issue with a possible attachment that I may have picked up from working with the paranormal. So it wasn't any surprise that she insisted we start with having a cleansing done. I say that because I walked straight upstairs into this room and laid down on a table. So she really didn't get much of a chance to look at my face for any length of time, which she had directed me to do. And she just starts doing her thing. First, she tells me how it's not from a client's house or something that I had recently picked up at all, for that matter, but that I had an attachment from a past life that had once been very intimate with me, that we had an intimate relationship, that we had made vows repeatedly to always be with one another for eternity. So, as part of the cleansing, she wanted to do a ritual. She had me say that I rescind any past contracts that no longer serve me in this lifetime, that I sever any connections from my previous lives and those that I had shared those incarnations with. Turns out, in doing so, I was releasing a small bit of that soul too, who had started out with the best of intentions in keeping their promise, but had evolved into something else that now resented me, my new life, my husband, my family, and was basically just feeding off of me at that point. To be honest, it was kind of both gross to think about and made me feel like I had the clingiest ex in the history of ever, though I'm sure others have experienced the same thing as well. I would have to imagine that. In fact, I've seen stuff like on TV about that, but not that specific instance. After everything that I had seen and experienced in the paranormal field, it was weird, yes, to say the least, to have happened to yourself. But if it had happened to someone else, it probably would have seemed like pretty strange to them too. After that, she told me that there was this like huge dog with me that followed me around everywhere, that would shrink up to go smaller places, but that he was actually huge, bigger than me. And she was like complaining because this was after the healing and we were like sitting down in this little corner of the room, and she was like saying that he had been crowding her and that he takes up a lot, like when she was healing. And then when she sat down, he was behind me, but he took up a large portion of the room. And she's like, I don't understand why he's not going smaller now. He's just huge. That actually floored me because there was no possible way that she could have known about that dog. I had seen him before, and he actually terrified me one time, the first time that I tried to do meditation when I was working for this one night shift job. I had a lot of time on my hands. It was great. I worked for a huge company. It was a fitness company, actually. And we basically got the run of the building at night, including a world-class gym with a separate training area, a bunch of separate training areas that were really quiet and private. In that meditation, I saw myself in this place. And I was like petting my dog. This was no ordinary dog, though. Again, he was huge. Mind you, until recently, I personally have never owned a dog. It's not that I don't like them, but something happened to me, I'm told, as a baby. And ever since, I've just had this kind of fear or weird hesitation kind of feeling in the pit of my stomach as it relates to dogs. Like, I love them. I've always loved the idea of them. I love other people's dogs, but touching them or like sitting with them, I don't know. It's just always been a thing for me. Like, I've always loved them from far away, but they always just made me feel a little scared or uncomfortable. That said, I really felt like I knew and loved this dog, which was one of the things that really stood out in my mind. Like, I'm here like hugging this dog and petting this dog. Like, he was my best friend. We went everywhere together. I just knew that as soon as I like touched this dog. After this, I actually tried a lot harder too, by the way, to be open to dogs, because it almost felt like a feeling that I had missed. Like, that it helped me to feel a little less scared or awkward or uncomfortable, which I know sounds strange given what happened, which will make sense in a minute. We'll get there. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. I sat there for a minute just petting this dog, and I was so happy, which would be weird to me at that point in time. But then we started walking down this sort of hallway, which was no big deal. It seemed like we were going into a room, and I was familiar with the layout of wherever I was at because it kind of almost looked like the interior door that was sitting right next to the front door. And the layout of this place was similar to one that someone I had known lived in. Which to me, I guess, is the reason I say that is it was normal because I knew that how our brains work is that it composes dreams and images and visions out of bits and pieces of people, places, and things that we've experienced throughout our lives. I've actually talked about that too in our dream episode. So that's not uncommon. So I didn't really think much of it. I don't usually give much thought to where I am when I'm having these visions or meditations or dreams, whatever the case may be. So at the time, I was just thinking I was going to go open up this bedroom door because in the place that was similar to that layout, that's where a bedroom door was. So since the location of that door would have led to that bedroom, that's where I thought I was going. In my mind, it was my place though, my dog, my bedroom. So I go to open this door, which doesn't seem like any big deal to me at first, but for some weird reason, this dog starts just growling at me. And I'm like, dude, what's up? And I just look down at him reassuringly at first, give him a few pets, and then I reach my hand back up and grab for the door. But there he goes again, only louder and more aggressive this time. I felt a little less comfortable with the dog, but again, he was my best friend. And I just felt like I had grown up around him. And my dad trained dogs when I was a kid, hunting dogs. So I knew I had to be calm, but assertive in order to proceed if the dog felt threatened for some reason. So I didn't risk being attacked. So while I'm over here, like, trying to be comfortable and chill still, I'm also in my mind trying to seem, I guess, authoritative. So as such, I snap back a little bit, insisting he quiet down as I start turning the knob. At that point, I'd not removed my hand and was about, and wasn't about to like worry about him biting it. But I was becoming a little bit concerned based on how much more aggressive he was becoming. But I didn't think that he was gonna like bite me. I thought that we were cool. So I go to turn the knob and the dog actually yelps at this point and backs away. I thought he was like, as I turned it, when I first heard that yelp, I remember thinking he was gonna go for my hand. Just that split second. I went from being so confident he wasn't going to, he's my buddy, chill out buddy, why are you acting weird? And then all of a sudden, whoa, but when he yelped, he actually backed up, like something had scared him that time. And so that tripped me out a little bit too. So back to what I was saying before, turn the dog yelps and backs away, and then right away I wake up from my meditation. And I could never get back to that point again. I ended up doing something similar, which was just in the last year or two, but we're talking 18 years ago, 17, 18 years ago. So there is no way, without me telling this lady, after all this time, that this psychic medium knew, yet she was telling me that she was seeing my dog. She described him perfectly too, except for one thing, that he had 3 heads. Not seen that. I had only seen 1 head. But everything else was the same. He was very wolf-like. He stood really tall. That his head was above me, which was true. I remember standing in that living room, and when I was petting him, his head was well above mine. His body was probably at neck or shoulder level, kind of right in there. He was a huge freaking dog. And she described him perfectly. Tripped me out. That's not even the craziest part. The craziest part about it was that there was no way for her to know that. And the other stuff. When she told me that she had seen something she'd never seen before, and it was so new to her that she had to ask her guides. I believed her. Believed her about the dogs. So I asked her, what are you talking about? She said that I had a lot of guides assisting me in this incarnation, but that on the day, there were 4 spirit guides with me, a couple of whom weren't always with me, but they came and went as they often did, and they decided to come that day. They usually came when I would participate in paranormal investigations or going out on, certain kinds of journeys, like going out and doing things. There were 2 that were with me at all times, as well as 3 guardian angels. Now, I had heard of people having 1. I'd even heard of people having 2, but 3 tripped me out. I did not expect that either. And that was the part that surprised her too. One of whom was the big surprise, which was doing something she hadn't seen before. They were walking behind me and holding what looked to her like an energetic dome around me. She said she still wasn't entirely sure what the purpose of it was, but I'm sitting there and she's talking to her guides, and they said that it was for my protection. She went on to say that another one of those 3 angels were always there walking right beside me to help me with not hurting myself. And I remember that I just got this funny image that popped into my head that I wish I could see again. But it was something to the effect of this very overworked angel having to constantly keep me from hurting myself. I just remember kind of laughing at it because I'm oh, this poor bastard. It was at that point, though, that I had told her that I was low vision and had 68% vision loss. That I was completely blind in one eye and basically had nothing but tunnel vision in the good eye. That contrast and depth perception were huge challenges for me. Though I think I've done pretty good at figuring out ways around them. I explained that. And she seemed genuinely satisfied with that answer because she's that makes so much sense. The way that she had explained it to me was that I had a lot that I needed to do, and in order to accomplish that, I had to have security kind of thing. It was funny. Ever since then, though, I have felt a lot closer to my angels and guides. Even more than that, after putting so many pieces of the puzzle together at this point, I believe that there have been a number of times when they communicated with me in a way that is unique to me and my physical and energetic signature. In writing this out, I've actually realized that what I thought was a skill I had just started to work on in getting and interpreting messages from them, I've been doing all along just fine. Just like when I instantly knew that I needed to fasten my seatbelt. I've said before that I felt like if I had any kind of, ability, it would be claircognizance, the just knowing, or something, an idea or a realization or something that just pops into your mind. Occasionally an image, but that's not very common, and usually only in a state of trance. As a child, I did often talk to myself. I've talked about this before too. Despite never seeing anyone there or expecting a response, I just knew. I always knew that someone was there with me. When I was in that accident, I knew. When I almost died giving birth to the one miracle child I was told I would never be able to conceive, I remember being scared then too, as they wheeled me in for an emergency C-section. I remember hearing the nurse rattle off my vital signs. It was something like 92/64. I remember it was well below 100, and it freaked me out. I thought for a split second that I was not going to make it through that procedure alive. But as I drifted off to sleep, maybe it was the Demerol, but I remember thinking that I felt warm and safe and just excited to meet my baby. Then what felt like just a few seconds later, I woke up to hearing a soothing voice saying, "That's it," which for some reason to me made me think that we were just getting ready to start, prompting me to ask, "Have we started yet?" To which the anesthesiologist laughed and replied, "We just finished." I remember I was so excited. We had never been able to get a good enough view during the ultrasounds to know the sex of my baby, begging the question I had asked in response, which was, "What was it?" Again, he laughed and informed me that it was a baby. Before pausing, apparently waiting for someone to laugh, which no one did, before finishing his sentence, "Girl." She had been whisked away already to the NICU because apparently the procedure had actually been done for a little bit. I was just rejoining the room. She was in the NICU due to breathing in meconium, which was causing her to have trouble breathing. She was actually later diagnosed with pneumonia. At first, they said she would likely be in there for 3 to 6 months. Some people were optimistic, some people were not so optimistic, so the answer varied, but that's what it was. A few days later, she was doing so much better that they expected her to be out within a few weeks. Funny enough, she was discharged just 4 days after that, 1 week after being born. Just so resilient, as I heard a lot of babies are. I was so proud. Fast forward 23 years after she was born, and 1 year after first learning about my angels and guides, circa April or May 2023, I would have my first experience with mushrooms. I meant to talk about this in the other episode related to that sort of thing. I planned it all out. I had a million questions for my guides, which I had all written down on a legal pad. I sat next to a huge insulated cup of water, took my shoes off, listening to Tibetan bowls. It was beautiful. It was incredible. Amazing. Funny thing, while I did get a lot of answers that day, I didn't get them all because some of those things were meant to be a surprise. Some of them were not yet set in stone. And there were a few things that would be bad for me to know about, apparently, since knowing would affect the outcome. But they did give me a beautiful gift that I had not anticipated, which was, I wrote down too, because I took notes as I was asking these questions. And so you could say that that's kind of channeling, but I haven't moved past that point, so I kind of feel like maybe, I don't know. Anyway, as I was asking these questions and I was writing down the answers, one of the things kept coming up was related to this baby. They were correcting me. It started out at first as being really, they corrected me probably a dozen times. about what the sex of my unborn grandbaby was. I remember I had it set in my mind because I liked this girl name that my daughter had picked out, Emerson Dawn, Dawn being named after me. So I was so hopeful that it was a girl that for some reason I just kept referring to the baby as a she a bunch of times. The first time when they gave me the big news, they did it by telling me that something to the effect of needing me to decide, or needing me to help the parents decide on a boy's name, which took me a second. But then I got excited upon realizing that it was a boy, and knowing that if I had to help pick out a name, that must have meant that she was going to carry him to term. And we were worried about that. And that was one of the reasons I had brought him up, was because she'd miscarried a couple of years prior. I was feeling so relieved that I guess I was just focused more on that aspect than the sex of the baby, because they had to keep reminding me. They reminded me a few more times, correcting me whenever I would say she or her. By the end, they said, "You are going to have to get used to the idea, or he's going to eventually get offended." I don't remember what it was exactly, but they were joking something to that effect. Most recently, I had tried to do an attunement on my next grandbaby, who is supposed to be coming in November. But just like I had on that one, to my surprise, it didn't work. Because I tried to do, and when I say attunement, I mean Reiki. The first time I had done a Reiki attunement on my grandson while he was in utero. And this time it didn't work. Like, I kept trying to make the symbol, and at first I couldn't make the symbol. Like, it just kept screwing it up. So I did it a couple of times, and then I went super slow. So I knew I couldn't mess it up, and I did it. But the strangest thing happened as I finished. And I had experienced something similar to this when my father-in-law was dying of cancer, and my sister-in-law was dying of polycythemia vera, where I sent this energy to them, but I didn't feel it land, if that makes sense. Like, usually when I send someone energy, I can feel it go somewhere, like almost like it's accepted, it's received. But with them, it just felt like that energy that I sent out went into the ether. That's the best way I can describe it. It just kept going. In this case, it like bounced back. It's hard to explain. It's like it didn't even get anywhere. I don't even think it made it out of my hands. It was the weirdest thing. I started to worry too, since I hadn't had that happen before, and I immediately started to worry about the baby. Then this like warm and loving feeling just came over me, and I heard this female voice tell me. And when I say I heard voices tell me things, it's hard to describe, because it's not like they use all of the words that I do when I'm relaying it to you. It's more like bits and pieces, like they give you kind of an idea and I'm interpreting it. But basically, this voice, I did hear the voice, it just doesn't use as many words. She told me that he wasn't in his vessel yet, but that he would be soon, and not to worry, but that wasn't needed. I was relieved, but still curious about what had happened. So she went on to explain that unlike my first grandson, this one was coming here to experience, and that, like me, he may decide to add the healing aspect to his journey and his matrix at some point, but as of now, it was not needed or wanted at this time. She declined me. It's weird. This made me, think about me, because I always thought I had, at least to some degree, carried that healer component with me. But in an instant, as if she were reading my thoughts, the answer came that explained everything, which went something like this. And I'm going to try to paraphrase here. While yes, there were healing aspects woven into your matrix, they were for the healing of the mind and spirit, not the body. while you have chosen to add that ability to your repertoire later in life. It could have changed some things had someone else added it prior, which is why I must decline your offer at this time. So she was the one that made the decision. I assume she's either his oversoul or his guide. But then she gave me a really cool gift, which freaked me out at first, so follow me through. But it got better as we went on. She said, "Do not be disappointed. There are other aspects of your being that will be of later use to him. Things that only you will be able to assist with. You will understand later. Some of these things you have not even learned or experienced yet. But one day, he will need you, and only you will be able to assist, since, like you, he came in to experience first and foremost." Which for some reason gave me the impression that he was going to be a more difficult child. And she kind of agreed with that. Like, I knew, I guess it's because the part of my childhood that popped into my head that was similar was I was a difficult, adventurous, and mouthy child. Like, I had good intentions, but I was very adventurous. I didn't want to be seen as disabled or crippled or whatever. And they had this conversation with me about that too, because I had seen this one thing and I had related to it deeply, which was referred to as the wounded healer. It was part of my birth chart. But they told me that that was the only way that they knew how to describe it, because usually it's because of somebody getting hurt that they are referred to as the wounded healer, or just the verbiage is just different. But they said the difference with me is that they said, make no mistake, you are a crippled healer. There's a difference. You came here crippled, and the healer didn't come until later. And so I thought that was kind of funny too, because once I related to that wounded healer, label, I vibed with it very much. But I think that I vibed with it because it's along the same idea as like, I came in with one hand tied behind my back and one eye shut, I was like gonna do this. And I've heard before that, people that are challenged in one way or another usually have more to do. And in my case, I knew that I was here to lead by example, which we've talked about a bunch of times, but it was just interesting hearing that perspective. Like, no, remember, you chose that. You came here that way. You were adventurous. He's going to be a lot like you. And so I was just I felt good about it, but still really weird and a little scared, because I'm like, what does that mean? That was where I started, like I said, to get a little nervous. I'm thinking about these things and my mind started playing with me a little bit. But I could tell that wasn't her intention, so I tried to keep it cool. And I instantly saw this kid in my mind who looked a lot more like his dad than the first one. So this kid had basically darker hair, kind of a brownish or maybe dark blonde hair. Before departing, she said that he was going to be a lot more of a handful, and that they would need my help on that end too. I guess confirming what I was thinking again. That I was going to be very influential, which led me to wondering what the hell this kid was going to do that only I would be able to help him deal with. And I honestly, at that point, started to freak out a little bit. I went from this relaxing and chill vibe, and mind you, this is within seconds, so I'm dragging it out a little bit, but we're talking 5 to 10 seconds that I'm seeing all of this. So this chill vibe starts to become tense, and I felt like I needed to stretch. That was my, I guess, physical response. So I'm laying on my left side, and I pull my right arm up and back behind me. It was a really strange position, actually, because I'm doing this kind of unconsciously. I'm just laying there stretching. And I remember leaving my arm out there for a minute, which I didn't really think of much. until it had been out there for several seconds, and I realized it. I noticed and looked over at my arm being really far back, like almost contorted. And I remember looking at it and thinking, it looks like hyperextended or something, but it felt amazing. I'm like, that's weird, but it feels so good. So as I'm sitting there, kind of getting nervous about what this kid's gonna do, and I'm like stretching, I look back at my arm, I think, why am I stretching my arm like this? Just then, it slowly starts to come back, and I think about maybe stretching it in a different direction or something so it doesn't hurt more later, because that's what I'll do. I'll go in one direction, and then I'll go in another direction in the opposite way, something like that. But out of nowhere, it starts bending at the elbow, and I'm literally just like sitting there watching my arm bend on its own. But I can't see my hand because I'm blind in one eye, so I can only see my arm from like right above the elbow and right below the elbow, so I don't see my hand. I know that sounds weird, it's hard to explain. But I shit you not, this is what's happening. All of a sudden, like, my forefinger pops out and taps the tip of my nose. And if that weren't weird enough, it like flicks it. And I hear this, "Don't worry about it," in a very similar voice to how me and my husband say that to each other all the time, which we learned from his son. I think of my son too, but which probably got it from The Sopranos because of how like gangster or whatever it sounds. But it was just the most incredible thing. My hand's all back, and then all of a sudden, I'm bending my elbow, and it just flicks my nose. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so funny. That's something that my mom did when I was really little, and I forgot about until that happened again. So I felt like it was reassurance to me that everything was going to be okay, and everything was going to work out the way that it was meant to. And I thought of my mom in that moment, and I thought of, what better way to reassure me than something so motherly. And I thought, this kid's got a pretty great guide, or so I'm not sure. But, hearing someone describe that, I totally understand. Like, if you're over here listening to this, that you're like, yeah, right, lady. But I can't make this shit up. This whole time, I've been wishing to have like a direct interface with my guides. And some of you have heard me complain at length about this when it comes to my attention, especially after doing this podcast. I've been this whole time interfacing with them as appropriate and in a way that's unique to me. My intention when first choosing to do this episode was to help you better understand the role of our angels and our guides. But in preparation, it's helped me too. I just had to share that because this has all happened like since deciding to do this episode, like that weird thing that I just described, like in the last week. It's just absolutely fascinating to me in seeing how much that they have been doing and how often I'm actually interacting with them or even other guides, which is a trip to me. So, a few takeaways that I do want to make sure I pass along that I believe would be helpful for you to know are these. That you have to ask for help when you need it. Your guides cannot intervene unless it's a near life or death situation, and it is not your time. They can't intervene when unnecessary because of free will. While you do have that roadmap to kind of guide you along, the choices are always yours. And that's part of the reason that some of those exit points are built in, because if you make some really bad decisions, you got to have an out. Sometimes those lead you down extra roads that you can't get back from. Those choices are always yours. So they can't stop you from making those choices. Otherwise, they do help guide you, but it's in a subtle way. Often directing your focus on something or bringing some things into your awareness. So, pay attention to things like synchronicities. Like, say you were really missing someone someone maybe that you haven't spoken to in a long time. And then all of a sudden, they call you or you run into them. There's probably a reason for that, and they were probably trying to prepare you. Same goes with dreams. And I regretted not expanding more on this in the dream episode, but it is very common for us to have a dream, especially ones that repeat, meant to prepare us for something. Though it is rarely exactly the way that you saw it. I want to mention that because a lot of dreams that people talk to me about are something to do with someone dying. Instead, it's more likely that the thing that you need to be prepared for is related to a thought, feeling, or emotion that was triggered as a result of what you saw. So, here's an example. Say like you saw someone get into a terrible accident or someone you love move away. Well, I did have a dream myself of someone in a car accident die, and then a week later I had someone actually close to me actually die in a car accident. That's rare. But usually if you see something terrible happen, it's because they're trying to prepare you for something with the emotion that will elicit. So in this example, say like someone or you got into a terrible accident or someone you love moved away. In both types of scenarios, you were made to feel grateful when you woke up, happy to still have that person in your life. Odds are that there is something that is going to happen that you being grateful for them will prevent, or that you need to consider, like maybe a big argument or a decision that you or they will have to make. Having come directly from whatever matrix they belong, in our case Earth, angels are masters of energy, frequency, vibration, and harmonization. If you are feeling out of sorts, physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, ask for your angels to assist you. They are capable of temporarily alleviating pain and discomfort of any kind. I say temporarily because they generally don't take all of the pain away forever, because there's usually something associated with why that's happening that is like the root of that. Like in Ayurveda, we believe that pain is a manifestation of something else that you need to examine. It could be physically, it could be emotionally, it could be spiritually, but it's something that needs to be resolved. But they can help you, at least temporarily, so that you can reset. And we'll probably do a meditation on this at some point where I can help you with that. But one good exercise is to imagine them standing behind you, calling on your guardian angels to envelop you, hug you, remove any negativity from your energetic field and transmuting it, sending it back into the ether. Works great, trust me. Our guides are generally the ones that communicate with us. So don't be surprised if you don't hear or interact with your angels much, if at all. But if you hear music, ringing, or a tuning sound, that's probably them working on something in the background. Sometimes it can be your guides trying to communicate with you too. So like that high frequency pitch, I think is oftentimes our guides, not specifically the angels. Because the guides are often trying to communicate with us, but I think to us it sounds like a really fast recording or chirping. But I believe that the sounds from the angels or being associated with music, and it's funny that they've been associated with singing for so long. But I think that those things are all connected, since they truly are masters of harmonization. Which leads me to our next episode. Next time, we will talk more about music, vibration, sound, frequency, and how they affect us. How can you use that information to your advantage? What you need to know. But that's all I have for today. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and as always, it has been my pleasure. Until next time, much love to you all. Namaste.